Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. Today we're going back to the 1930s to look at one of the most famous American-made 35mm cameras of all time, the Argus C-3, otherwise known as the Brick, and also recognized as the camera that Colin Creevey used in the Harry Potter movie Chamber of Secrets. So, stick around. Before we get into the episode, I want to thank Rebecca White for today's community photo, taken with a Canon A1 on Ilford Pan F with a Sigma 35-70 lens. Here we have a very contrasty lighting situation, but I love the way the light plays on those seats under the window. So thanks for sending this in, Rebecca. If you have a photo you'd like to send in for the wall feature, just send me an email. I'll put the address down in the description. Now, we talked a little bit about U.S. camera manufacturing in the last episode when we were discussing the Kodak Signet camera series. And it was sort of implied, although I think it could be outright stated, that when it came to camera design, the U.S. had wildly different ideas and goals than manufacturers in Germany and Japan. The latter two set the precedent for fine, tightly engineered mechanical masterpieces. The US, on the other hand, seemed to be happy enough as long as the camera worked, and more importantly, sold. By the end of the 19th century, Kodak had taken photography, a craft that was highly technical and quite expensive, and successfully brought it to the masses, and other American companies were paying attention. One such company was the International Radio Corporation of Ann Arbor, Michigan. They were manufacturers of radios, no surprise there, but they were using a relatively new material called Bakelite in their construction. Bakelite is a plastic material that can easily be formed into complex shapes, as opposed to metal, which requires more expensive machining or stamping, or even wood, which might be hard to source on demand. The use of this plastic meant that the construction material could be produced in-house, and it could be easily shaped into whatever component you needed, and done so at a much reduced cost, which could be passed on to the consumer. So these plastic Bakelite radios were great sellers. But back then, radios were a seasonal item. They sold well in fall and winter when folks spent more time indoors, but not so well in spring and summer when more time was spent outdoors. So the president of International Radio Corporation, Charles Verschuer, came up with the idea to produce cameras made of Bakelite that would take advantage of the public's growing interest in Kodak's new 135 cassette film. So in 1936, they released the Argus A at a price of $12.50 US, which was unheard of at the time for a camera that used this new, much smaller film. By the way, that price equates to about $290 today. But sales of this camera were good, very good. So good, in fact, that the company sold off its radio patents and decided to go into camera production full-time, changing its name to International Research Corporation, and were soon adding new cameras to the lineup. In 1938, they released a new camera design, the Argus C, that included an uncoupled rangefinder. So uncoupled just means that you use the rangefinder to find the subject distance, then you manually transfer that distance to the lens. But the next year, 1939, they released the C2, which featured a coupled rangefinder. The rangefinder being coupled means that you use the rangefinder to find the distance, but it's also connected to the lens focusing unit, so you don't have to manually set the lens distance anymore, and this led to more precise focusing. Later that same year, they made a minor update to the C2 by adding flash sync contacts, and changed the name of the camera to C-3, and the rest is history. This camera became the best-selling U.S.-made 35mm camera ever. It was in production in one form or another from 1939 all the way to 1966. And during that time, over 2 million of them were sold. And that's why you can go into just about any antique shop in the U.S. and find one, or 5. There are also a couple of special variants of the C3. There was the Colormatic and the two-tone Matchmatic. The Colormatic just used some color-coded exposure controls. The Matchmatic is actually the type featured in the Harry Potter movie. It used a simplified exposure system that supposedly was easier to understand than shutter speeds and f-stops. And it required a matching accessory light meter for that system to work. I think it turned out that that wasn't so simple after all, but the C3 is the ubiquitous vintage camera. And some of them, most of them, are going to be in less than stellar condition at this point. Two of the most common issues with these cameras are the viewfinder and rangefinder windows are very hazy, and the grease that lubricates the focusing and rangefinder mechanisms is dried out and turned into cement. But these cameras have such a simple design that these issues are relatively easy to fix. This one was one of the first cameras I bought for my collection in the early 1990s. It looked old and it looked cool, but I didn't know a single thing about it. It was plagued with the hazy viewers and dried out grease, but I didn't really have any intention to use it. I just wanted to sit it on my office shelf and be a conversation piece. But 35 years later, here I am with a reason to shoot it. So I've tuned it up and cleaned it, and now it's ready for some film. Now, one thing I discovered in that process, and this may be well known to some of you, but these cameras are designed to accept interchangeable lenses. So in the interest of education, I picked them up. Just so we can use this camera as it was intended. The standard lens for the C-3 is a made in the USA 50mm f3.5 Centaur that's a coated anastigmat, and it's a 3-element design based on the Light's Elmar with a 9-bladed diaphragm to keep that bokeh circular throughout the 3.5 to f16 range. The 2 additional lenses were not made in the US. Both of these were manufactured in Germany by Interwerk. We have a 35mm 4.5 Sandmar wide angle and a 100mm 4.5 Tele-Sandmar. Both are coated anastigmat designs just like the standard 50 and have 9-bladed diaphragms as well. And since this is a rangefinder and not an SLR, we have to make use of an accessory viewer when using these lenses. The viewer just clips on the top of the rangefinder and around the rangefinder window in the back so that it's located directly above the lens. And it has a drop-down mask that restricts the angle of view to match the 100mm. Without the mask, the viewer matches the angle of view of the 35. This is a very simple viewer though and has no way to compensate for parallax. Now we'll go through the steps of changing the lens in just a minute, but I want to quickly go over the rest of the camera first. The shutter speed dial is over on the top left front, and depending on the year the camera was made, you may see different speeds. This one dates from the early 40s and shows 7 speeds. This one is a later version that only shows 5, but the range of speeds is the same, 1/10 of a second to 1/300th of a second. One thing you want to make sure of when changing the speeds is to always move the dial counterclockwise to your desired speed. There's an internal hard stop between 1/10 of a second and 1/300th of a second that only allows it to move in one direction. So if you move it clockwise between those 2 speeds, you'll damage that internal mechanism. Also, it's perfectly fine to set the dial in between the marked speeds to achieve intermediate times. Once you have the shutter speed set, you charge the shutter with a lever on the front below the rangefinder window. Turn this in a counterclockwise direction too. And you'll need to be careful where you put your fingers when you release the shutter, because if the shutter charging lever hits your fingers in the middle of the exposure, it will keep the shutter open. And that is exactly where it feels normal to have your fingers when shooting this. So again, be aware. On some of these cameras, the lever is in a slightly different position, and if that's the case, you may not have any trouble with it at all. Now we are ready to focus and make the photo. On the back of the camera, there are 2 viewing ports. The one on the right is for the rangefinder, so as you're looking through there, you can turn the lens or the rangefinder dial to bring the split image together. Once that's accomplished, you'll use the viewport on the left to compose if you're using the standard lens, or by using the accessory viewer if using one of the other lenses. Once you make the photo, move the film counter lever over to the left and use the Y knob on the top left to advance to the next frame, and it'll automatically stop at the next frame. Speaking of the frame counter, it doesn't automatically reset to 0 when you load film. Once your film is loaded, you'll need to move the lever again to the left and set the counter to 0 manually. One other thing to mention is that these cameras do have B or bulb as a shutter speed, but it's not found on the shutter dial. You can choose B by the collar around the shutter release. It has 2 settings and they're both engraved. One is I for instant or normal shutter speeds, the other is marked B. Now, changing the lenses. The method for doing it makes it seem that interchangeable lenses was an afterthought, and chronologically it does seem to be the case, as the telephoto was only first available in late 1952 and the wide angle appeared just a few months after that. And as cumbersome as the process of changing the lenses is, this feature was apparently popular enough for third-party manufacturers such as Soligor and Fuji to offer compatible lenses for the C-3 as well. Before we start though, I want to mention a very important point. This process is going to require you to uncouple the rangefinder from the lens. And when you do that, the rangefinder dial can turn freely. In the booklet, Argus states that it's very important at this point not to turn the rangefinder dial anywhere in the area where rangefinder is written. This is the danger zone and can damage the internal components of the rangefinder system, and we don't want that to happen. However, the reality of it is that once you're done mounting either the tele or the wide angle, the rangefinder dial will absolutely turn past the 3-foot mark, since both lenses will focus at a shorter distance. So I guess that's okay. But that also brings up another point that's very cool. The rangefinder will allow the 100mm to focus at less than 3 feet. And that's not usually possible. But with this camera, it works out. Just be aware of parallax error because there's no correction available on the accessory viewer. All right, so let's do it. The first thing to do is to set the rangefinder dial to the minimum 3-foot mark. Next, unscrew the idler gear cap. Hopefully it's easy to unscrew. But if your C-3 has never had the original lens removed, it might be hard to do so. Once the gear cap is removed, you'll need to remove the idler gear. Next, grip the lens collar and unscrew the lens from the camera by turning it counterclockwise. Next, turn the rangefinder dial clockwise until it lines up at the infinity mark. Turning it clockwise will keep us out of that danger zone. Next, take the new lens and screw it into the lens mount until it's tight. Then we're going to rotate the lens collar until the infinity mark lines up with the indicator. Now we're going to put the idler gear back into place. Screw the gear cap back on until tight. And you're set. Now this is obviously cumbersome by today's standards. I mean, we're removing some of the camera's components, making sure not to drop them or lose them in the process, then making sure we don't turn the rangefinder dial into the disaster zone, making sure the lens is correctly aligned at infinity, then reassembling the pieces we took off. It makes me wonder if Argus sold the idler gear and gear cap as separate pieces, because there's obviously going to be a market for that with all the ones that got lost in the process of changing the lens. Anyway, that's how it's done. I'm going to include a link down in the description to a PDF of the official Argus instructions for this. I think you'll find it to come in handy. Now, when you want to put the standard lens back on it, the process is a little different because the standard lens has no distance scale. So you can't align the infinity mark like we just did for this lens. But the standard lens's mounting collar isn't geared all the way around like the accessory lenses, so it will base infinity off of that. So to remove the accessory lens, we're going to turn the rangefinder dial back to the 3-foot mark, unscrew the idler gear cap, and remove the gear. Then we can unscrew the lens. To replace the standard lens, screw it in the mount as far as it will go. Then align the rangefinder dial at the infinity mark. Now here's where it's a bit different. What we want to do is make sure the idler gear is aligned with the very last tooth available on the lens collar while maintaining the rangefinder dial at infinity. And this might mean you need to move the lens collar back and forth a little bit to get the gear to seat just right. But when you have it, turn the rangefinder dial back to the 3-foot mark and replace the idler gear cap. The reason you need to set the dial to 3 feet when reattaching the cap is that on some of these cameras, this one being an example, the cap is larger in diameter than the gear. And if the lens is set at infinity, you won't have the clearance to screw it back in. Basically, when you set the lens to 3 feet, it extends the lens and makes a little space to get that gear cap back on. On some of these cameras though, like this one, the gear cap is smaller than the idler gear. So there'll be room no matter what distance the standard lens is set to. So just be aware. Now, this camera has received new attention over the last couple of decades since it was featured in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So in keeping with that theme, I'm going to let the sorting hat tell us what film to use for the shoot.
I know just what to do with you, Delta 100.
Well, I guess that settles that. And never let it be said that I am not a nerd. Let's go shoot. I have my 3 Argus C-3 cameras out, and I have a different lens on each one. So that was cool that I have 3, because otherwise changing these lenses out in the field would be a nightmare, I think. Anyway, first shot is going to be these awnings that are on these windows back here. We've got good shadow, lights coming in at a good angle. And I think that the 100 will be perfect for that. So I have metered it at 1/250th of a second at f11. So let's get a shot or two. These cameras don't have 1/250th, they have 1/300, so that's what I will be using. All right, cock the shutter. Make sure my fingers are out of the way. These rangefinders are not quiet at all. It sounds like a mouse trap going off. Yeah, so I'm gonna try to get this shot. So moving in closer to the awnings, I think it's a good opportunity for a 35mm lens with that. So let's meter this up. Should be about the same, 1/250th of a second at f8. And this is, like I said, this is gonna be with a 35mm lens. All right, so 1/250th of a second at f11. We don't have that. We have 1/300th of a second at f11. All right, the rangefinder here is really magnified, which is good. I'm gonna tilt just a little. Let's cock the shutter, get my fingers out of the way. Behind me, we have the historic Reese Opera House, circa 1883, which is now offices, but I like the sign. So let's meter up. 1/120th of a second at 3.5. So these cameras have 1/100th of a second. So I'll do either f4 or 3.5 or somewhere like that. I'm going with the 35mm lens again. So I get to use this lens pretty, I don't have 3.5 on this lens. So let's go somewhere like 1/60th of a second at 4.5 and see what happens. Is this a vertical shot possibly? Maybe, we'll do both. Charge the shutter. We'll do a vertical shot too. Cool, all right. Now I am definitely in the shade here, but Newnan has a nice historic courthouse. We've got good light on it right now, so thinking maybe with the 50 and even with the 100mm. Now, how do I meter this? I need to find a place in the sun that's the same as that. So what I have decided is that, well, that's sunny 16, right? And I'm not a huge fan of sunny 16. I always think sunny 16 is just a little bit underexposed. But for me to take an actual reading in this light, I got to cross the street. And that means going to the crosswalk and waiting on the sign to tell me to walk. Anyway, that's going to take too much time. So I am going to go by the sunny 16 rule. And I might bracket it, of course. I'm going to shoot with the 50. Still in the shade here. All right, so f16 is the minimum aperture on this 50. But that's, I don't usually like to shoot it at the minimum aperture, but that's what we've got and that's what we are faced with. So that's gonna have to work. However, actually, I don't have to do that. Sunny 16, so I could go 1/16 to 11. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of guesstimating here and go 1/300th of a second at f8. The exposure latitude of the film surely will save me in this, right? All right, and we're going to get a vertical. Shutter is cocked. All right, now for one with the 100 millimeter. So I was at 1/300th of a second at about f8. Frame that up, cock the shutter. Oh, this is super tight. Well, it looks super tight anyway. So before I move from this very spot, I'm going to use the 100. See if I can get a nice tight shot of these lamps with the architecture in the background. I've got a couple of, let's see, this might work. It's not a bad shot of the Reese Opera House sound from there. Yeah, so I'm gonna try something on this lamp. Maybe get some tighter detail shots too. So I need to take a meter reading here. All right. Well, I'm not gonna be able to do it with the 100 because we are at a maximum aperture of 4.5, and at 1/60th of a second, it's telling me 3.5. So I do not have the right film for this. And I'm not dropping it below 1/30th. I know that's just gonna be camera shake. All right, so that means it's gonna be the 50. And to be honest, the 50, the camera doesn't shoot at 160, it shoots at 1/50th of a second. So I'll hold my breath and hope everything is decent. I'll probably get camera shake out of this. I'll try my best not to though. All right. Yeah, horizontal looks good. All right, cock the shutter. So I think I'm gonna stick to sunlit areas for the rest of this roll, or these rolls. So here are some benches out in the sun, but the light's coming in good. Might make some good shapes. I'm gonna tinker around with a couple of different angles on these, maybe get some detail shots. I'm gonna start with the 50 millimeter and see how that goes. 1/250th of a second at 5.6 and a half. So 300 at 5.6, let's say. All right, so I'm gonna focus on the middle. 300 at 5.6. It's a little bit tighter than I would like. Well, it seems to be anyway. Is it really? I don't know. Let's get in as close as I can, which is going to be about right here. So it seems like everything I'm shooting today is up. That's all right, because there's some cool architectural detail here. I like the angles coming in. There's going to be a lot of diagonals in there. Diagonals add that energy and tension. I'm thinking the 50, we'll see. So 250 at 5.6, but I'm going to do 1/120th of a second, or 1/100th of a second at f8. 1/100 at f8. Yeah, it's a lot of good angles in there. All right. All right, cock the shutter. So 35 next, and we'll do the horizontal. Because with the 50, I was cutting the top off of the dome. Before I change the viewfinder though, let's see what we've got as far as the 100 goes. Well, that's pretty interesting too. A lot of neat angles coming in. Yeah, let's do a couple here. So what did I say? 1/300 at 5.6.
All right, let's go ahead and change it to the 35. Cock the shutter. All right. I think there's probably some wide angle architecture shots here on the front. Now let's try that. All right, so to make this quick, my memory card's about to be full, and I traveled light today and didn't bring an extra card. Even though I thought about it, I was like, nah.
Well, let me just say that the results lived up to my expectations, which were not high. The lenses did pretty well when stopped down to smaller apertures, but wide open they are soft, and they have a bit of vignetting too. But that's kind of cool. I think my favorite lens of the lot is the 35mm. It seemed to provide the sharpest results. In any case, we have to accept that these were mass market cameras. They were cheap and never really intended to compete with higher end 35mm. The basic design is from the mid-30s and didn't change at all throughout the run, so all the way to 1966. That's 30 years of keeping it the same, so it definitely feels old school, and the results do too. They do have character though, and you might find that attractive. Another thing that I was sort of expecting was for there to be some inaccuracy with the rangefinder system. I mean, we're taking lenses off, we're putting them on, we're aligning infinity marks and all of that, and it just seems like it would be a recipe for disaster. But the rangefinder controls are pretty much locked down, and as long as you don't venture too far over into the danger zone of that dial, it's pretty hard to screw it up. Or maybe I just got lucky. Still, I don't think I'd like to be trying to swap out one of these lenses out in the field, so I'm glad these cameras are cheap enough to have one for each lens. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. This one was a lot of fun. If you did find it entertaining, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see more film camera stuff, be sure to subscribe. Coming up soon, maybe even next, will be kind of a chapter 2 on Argus cameras, and we'll focus on the C-4 and C-44 cameras, which were a definite upgrade over the C-3. And I know you don't want to miss that, right? I'll see you then.